O'Connor. Jonathan Smith. And can I get those on Teams, please, to also say if they're present? Iona Mayhew.
Present.
William Hardy. William Hardy.
Present.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, everyone. So I will go straight to declaration of interest. Members are asked to declare any interest that you may have. Nobody online, nobody in the room, so we go to the next item, the minutes of the last meeting. I've seen there were one update we received today from Simon Renner. Were there any other updates which you should come? Nope. Okay, so do we want to approve the minutes, or have you got any question on the minutes? I check online, nobody has, in the room, nobody has. So we're happy to agree with the minutes. Thank you. We'll go into the planner, the forward planner. Any question on the forward planner? No? Can we agree for the forward planner? Agree. There were 2 minutes to agree, by the way. There was management group minutes as well. Are we agreeing on the management group minutes as well? Thank you. Now we're going straight into a national update, and that will be a verbal update, and that will be first of all from Iona Mayhew, who is attending virtual. Iona.
Hi, thank you very much. So I'm going to give an update on 4 areas today: employability, reducing reoffending, child poverty, and population health. Looking at employability first. So in December 23-24, the budget statement to Parliament set out a commitment to provide more than 110 million for the delivery of employability support this financial year, demonstrating Scottish Ministers' commitment to support those who face the most significant challenges in entering and staying in the labour market. We have person-centred tailored services, which are delivered through a combination of locally designed services, which are No One Left Behind, and our National Employment Service, Fair Start Scotland. And there were 54,000 starts on Fair Start Scotland between the period of April 2018 to December 2022. And statistics for No One Left Behind show that there was 29,000 people who started receiving support in the first 3.5 years from April 2019 to September 2022. So whilst we continue to face economic challenges and a cost crisis, the Scottish Government remains committed to investing in employability and training to help the economy recover. Our overall vision is to create a more successful country with opportunities for all of Scotland to flourish through increased well-being and sustainable and inclusive economic growth. And we're committed to transforming employment support to simplify the landscape and to deliver better outcomes for people who are further removed from Scotland's labour market to achieve their full potential. One of the approaches I mentioned is the No One Left Behind approach, and this is our approach to transforming employment support in Scotland. And we must be confident that a robust model is in place through No One Left Behind to ensure that there's competent delivery of the obligations under the Scotland Act to support those at risk of long-term unemployment and unemployed disabled people. Development work will continue to be undertaken with input from across the public, third and private sectors, as well as with service users themselves via our Employability Services Lived Experience panel. And we have recently announced a 12-month extension of Fair Start Scotland referrals until March 2024, and the decision to extend Fair Start Scotland will support stability within the system and continue to provide employability support to people at risk of long-term unemployment over the next 12 months. So moving on to reducing reoffending, the National Community Justice Strategy revised So this sets out the national direction for community justice by building on progress made to date. And the strategy retains our long-standing aim to take a person-centred, rehabilitative approach to community justice, ensuring that a shift is in the balance between custodial and community interventions. It recognises that while public protection is paramount, there is a clear evidence that community-based interventions and sentences can be more effective in reducing reoffending and assisting with rehabilitation than short-term custodial sentences. And the strategy has a focus on 4 national aims relating to diversion and early intervention, the provision of robust and high-quality interventions, responsive services which meet the needs of individuals, and strong leadership and partnership working. There's also the bail and release from custody bill, and this government's focus is to ensure victims and public safety are at the net of the justice system, which is a key part of continuing to cut crime and reoffending so there are fewer victims. The Bail and Release from Custody Scotland Bill supports the Scottish Government's commitment to change the way that imprisonment is used, and the provisions in the bill are intended to ensure that as much as possible the use of the custody for remand is a last resort for the court and to give a greater focus to the rehabilitation and reintegration of individuals leaving custody. I'll just talk a wee bit about child poverty as well. So, tackling child poverty is a national mission, and we are using all the powers and resources available to us to support families as far as possible and tackle the underlying causes of inequality. So the Tackling Child Poverty delivery plans include Every Child and Every Chance, which ran from 2018 to 2022, and we invested an estimated 8.5 billion supporting low-income households, of which 3.3 billion benefited children. The second plan is the Best Start Bright Futures, and it runs from 2022 to 26. And the focus of this is on long-term parental employment support, increased social security, and measures to reduce household costs. And after this plan, there will be a third plan which will cover 26 to 2030. So the Best Start and Bright Futures plan, which is the second one, commits to testing and learning from new ways of working to tackle child poverty. And it's starting at the minute with Pathfinders in Glasgow and Dundee, but also working with other areas to learn from innovative practice on how to effectively support families. And the plan includes further increasing the value of the Scottish Child Payment to £25 and expanding it to eligible children under the age of 16 from November 2022. The Scottish Fiscal Commission forecasts around 387,000 children will be eligible in 23-24, and it is estimated to lift 50,000 children out of poverty and reduce relative child poverty by 5 percentage points in 23-24. So there will also be further investment over the lifetime of the plan through the No One Left Behind approach to strengthen the employability offered to parents. And the plan will explore the development of a new parental transition fund to tackle financial insecurity for families when parents and carers enter the labour market. And finally, looking at population health. So smoking is the primary preventable cause of ill health and premature death in Scotland. In each year, tobacco use is associated with around 100,000 hospital admissions and 9,000 deaths in Scotland. Adults living in the most deprived areas in 2021 were more likely to be current cigarette smokers, with 5% in the least deprived areas compared to 24% in the most deprived. Smoking not only creates health inequality, but the financial cost to smokers contributes to social and economic inequalities as well. Smoking cessation services are essential to ensuring people have access to the right support at the right time. However, while smoking rates have dropped, there are few people starting to smoke, the pandemic has seen a decline in the number of people quitting and the number using free NHS stop smoking services. Therefore, the Scottish Government are committed to working with NHS cessation coordinators and pharmacy colleagues across Scotland to refocus and remobilise these services to ensure we're reaching those in our communities who are in most need of support to quit. And finally, just touch on alcohol treatment briefly. So in 2021, 1,245 people died from alcohol-specific causes in Scotland, and this is 5% higher than 2020 and the highest number of deaths since 2018. Deaths attributed to alcohol were 5.6 times as likely in the most deprived areas of Scotland compared to the least deprived areas. And initiatives that will support communities across Scotland to address harmful and hazardous alcohol consumption include piloting a managed alcohol programme in Glasgow in partnership with Simon Community Council Scotland, and working with Public Health Scotland to conduct a review of alcohol brief interventions in Scotland, consulting on a range of potential alcohol marketing restrictions in Scotland, and supporting the UK Government in reviewing and updating clinical guidelines for alcohol treatment. We are also developing alcohol treatment targets alongside Stage 2 of the Drugs Targets implementation in 2024, and this will ensure that people with problematic alcohol use continue to receive the same quality of care as those with problematic drug use. That's me all finished, but happy to take any questions from anyone.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive verbal update, Iona. Any question online or in the room? Yes, Susan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Iona. Really helpful update. Clearly, tackling child poverty is something that every area is working hard on, and we've got our report on the committee today. Just wondering, what's the mechanism for sharing learning at early stages from the pathfinders in Dundee and Glasgow that you've mentioned?
Yep, I can speak to the policy team who kind of lead on these areas and make sure that they're kind of sharing learnings with you. Can I just take a note of your name, sorry, so I can make sure I can get in contact with you?
Sure, it's Susan Webb. I'm Director of Public Health in the North East.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Susan. It might be good to send it straight to the board, and we can all share it with everybody. But as a form as an update, would be great. Any other question or any asking for any kind of update? No one sending things, no one left behind. Alcohol treatment in Glasgow and a review afterwards. Anything anybody wants to ask or to suggest as an update from government? Yes, Susan.
Yeah, again, just to touch on the smoking cessation services review, just to say in the North East there has been a review with partners from across the system around our tobacco strategy, and we are anticipating a national strategy coming out in September, but we would be keen to bring that into community planning conversations, because it will also touch on things such as vaping. So these are really important areas, and really keen to have conversations through community planning. Thank you.
Yes, that maybe the board will be happy to have that kind of agenda on our next meeting. I'm looking at my advice, maybe will be some interesting about what's going to happen with vaping legislation in the future, and anybody else or everybody else in everybody nodding heads. So that would be very welcome. So if we can have that on the agenda as an agenda item for next meeting, it would be very helpful. Anything else for Iona? Yes, please.
More just not necessarily a question, more just a kind of add on to when Iona spoke about community justice within policing within the North East. What we're trying to do is to take less people into police custody and look at direct measures more. And what I mean by that is there are far more direct measures open to police officers just now, rather than simply taking the liberty of somebody. That obviously will continue to remain I say discretionary. Sometimes there's no discretion needed. It's obvious that people need to come into custody, but there's times when they don't need to, and there's more options available to police officers, and the result of that should be less court time, less witnesses having to go to court, less police officers having to go to court, and more time policing. So that, whilst it's those direct measures, and it kind of aligns to the strategy that Iona spoke of there as well, It's taken a bit of time culturally to land and get up to speed with our police officers in the sense of what they traditionally would have done and arrest it. There's also balance in that perception of the public when they contact the police or something happens and they don't see somebody being taken into a police vehicle and driven away. There may well be another disposal happens, but clearly the police officers, are trained in knowing, when there's risk to the public that risk needs to be taken away. That will always remain. But again, just kind of leading into that kind of community justice and the direct measures from police officers, they might not always be arresting and taking somebody into custody.
No, thank you. That was very helpful, and I saw a lot of nodding heads. I think it's not only police officers, but I think the direction that a lot of us present in the room today or online will agree with you on that, and you've got all that support for that. And I wonder if the support is enough with what we're doing already in community planning, if we are addressing that direction that you are taking more and more locally, and maybe something we can revisit with the different projects that we have to see if we can target that a bit more. But I know there is something in the papers about that already. Okay, thank you very much, Iona. If you no more comment or questions, thank you again. And we'll go straight to Niamh O'Connor, who will be presenting to introduce herself maybe and give us a reason for her visit to Aberdeen. Yes, you can.
Good afternoon, colleagues.
It may be helpful if you can take one of the seats and maybe use one of the mics just to make sure you can be heard online. Thank you very much for that.
So afternoon, colleagues, and this is literally a brief introduction. So I'm Niamh O'Connor, Deputy Director of Population Health Strategy and Improvement at the Scottish Government. Here is my colleague today, John Nicholson, who is Co-Deputy Director, and we were happened to be at NHS Grampian this morning with Susan's senior public health team. So very grateful to Michelle and to yourself, Chair, for enabling us to observe at the community planning meeting this afternoon. So it's a core part of our work around the wider determinants of what creates health, much of which happens around the community planning table up and down the country. So that's just to explain why we're here, and thought we would tag it on to Iona's update there if that made sense. So that's literally it. So thank you.
Sure, and if you want to add anything to what I said already, you are very welcome. Anything you had with a meeting with Susan, anything locally that you want to highlight to the board, I'll be very happy to do so and give you the freedom to do so.
Well, I can very briefly say that some of the board will be aware, I know, of conversations going on nationally around population health in the longer term, which really needs that, as I said, wider community planning involvement and leadership. So that gets called the care and wellbeing portfolio approach, and that's what we were with Susan and her team this morning to talk about. And I know some of the members of the board have been discussing with the Scottish Government leads on that already. So won't take up, I know you've a busy agenda today, so won't take up time with this agenda slot. It was literally to explain who the two people at the back of the room were, Chair. So I'll pause there.
Okay, thank you very much. Any question or any comment from online or in the room? So thanks very much for the contribution and for coming to Aberdeen. And if you want to participate in any of the discussion, you're always very welcome to do so.
Thank you. I'll sit back, but no, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go straight to the tragic business. 2.1 timeline for the refreshed local outcome plan, 2016-2026 and locality plan. So Michelle Crombie will speak to this item.
Thanks, Councillor Allard. This paper sets out a proposed timeline to refresh LOIP and underpinning locality plans being presented to the CPA board in April next year. To date, our approach has been to refresh the LOIP and the locality plans every 2 years, and our last refresh was in July 21.
So we are due to do it again this year. Our proposal is that although we'll commence the refresh this year, we will work towards the deadline of April 24 to bring the revised plans to the board. And this will just allow time for current improvement activity to be concluded and to ensure that any changes to the LOIP and the locality plans are based on evidence of our impact so far. As always, the population needs assessment will be core to our approach, and we're working towards completing this by September. And we've already started reviewing our data sets for the PNE, and we're engaged in discussions with colleagues, mainly through Martin Murchie from the HDRC North East Population Health Alliance, and we've also been talking to colleagues in strategic place planning about how they can support and strengthen the PNE process this year. So the timeline that Alison has included in the report sets out the PNE and the other key milestones that will lead us to the refresh, and the recommendation is for the board to approve the high level timeline for us to work towards, so that Alison and others can develop a more detailed plan in consultation with the management group.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle. I just wanted to check if the timeline is let's say, difficult for us to follow, or are we quietly confident that we can do that on time and we can do that properly? Sorry.
I think so. It's given us several months to get there. Obviously, always it's nice to have more time to do these things. However, I think I wouldn't be presenting this timeline if I wasn't confident that we could deliver it, and that we would do so in a way that brings a robust outcome to that process.
Yeah, I would have formulated my question better. Do we need ourselves as partners to do anything to make sure that we are there to that timeline? Is there something that people around the room have to do just to make sure that we help and support as much to adhere to that timeline? Or anybody will have question about it, to knowing that we're all confident that we will do so. Or any question you will have on Michelle before we agree on the timeline. Yes, Councillor Cook.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just in terms of once the revised LOIP is agreed, as we get emerging evidence, and we've got other papers today around population health issues, we might get some emerging evidence from that suggests that whatever we agree in April next year might need a wee bit of tweaking. So I just wanted to be reassured that if there is a need for tweaking, we're okay to tweak.
I'm never sure whether you need the mics in this room, to be honest, but we're always in that position that we are agile to be able to respond to data fluctuations that we see in our outcomes improvement framework. And indeed, the board has been asked over the course of the last few years that there will be times that they've sought an amendment to the LOIP or an improvement aim based on that evidence. So that would be something that we would continue to do.
Yes, Councillor Riley.
Mine is a comment more than a question. I really think the timeline that's in front of us is really helpful. It's really visual, and we can see exactly what is taking place when, and would welcome that approach in the future as well for sort of timeline-based things.
I think it's noted, Councillor Riley. Absolutely, something visual is always easier when you've got a timeline. Thank you very much for this. Any other comment or question? Yes, Linwood.
Yeah, thank you. You'll be aware, following the publication of my Director of Public Health's annual report, part of our intention is to work with community planning partners to talk around the threats to health. This will happen over the same timeline, so ties very neatly into the process that is outlined. Thanks.
Okay, very reassuring again, but with a parallel approach. Thank you very much. No other question or comment online or in the room. So are we happy to agree the timeline for the approval of the fresh local outcome improvement plan and the plan as contained in Appendix 1? Agreed? Thank you very much. Let's go to the next item, which is 2.2, the draft strategic partnership agreement, Public Health Scotland as an office population health. Angela Scott, to speak with our chief executive.
Thank you, Councillor Allard. I'll maybe kick off, and Susan Webb is Director of Public Health, and her colleague Alan, who's actually done all of the work, Councillor Allard, more than me and Susan, so important to say that. You'll recall that we are an active member of the North East Population Health Alliance, which the Director of Public Health and NHS Grampian are convening. It's very welcome. It adds a real contribution to the work that we are doing in the city. Public Health Scotland is a co-sponsored organisation between Scottish Government and local government, and probably fair to say that in its inception, its significant attention has been consumed by the pandemic. Public Health Scotland are now actively moving, I think, much more into the space of health improvement, which is critical given the exacerbation of health inequality and other issues of inequality that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. So through our collective membership of the North East Population Health Alliance, which includes, and just to remind members of this board, it includes the 3 councils in Grampian, it includes the 3 IGBs, it's convened by NHS Grampian, it includes colleagues from Police Scotland and from Scottish Fire and Rescue. So as a collective, we've been trying to explore how we can really enhance our relationship with Public Health Scotland. We clearly have sectoral links in, so both NHS colleagues and local government, but as a place we were keen to really cement a partnership with Public Health Scotland. I do think from a city perspective, it really adds to the work that colleagues have been leading on the establishment of the Health Determinants Research Forum. Again, we were really successful, and I'm delighted that we were, through the funding from NIHR, that's allowed us to create a health determinants research collaborative. I think there's a clear and distinct relationship between that HDRC and then the long-standing relationship with Public Health Scotland. I understand that we are the first place based to attempt to form this kind of memorandum of understanding with Public Health Scotland, which is great. I hope it will be a model for Public Health Scotland as it interfaces at a place level, and I guess we all understand that people live their lives at a place level. They don't live their lives at a kind of national level. So I think that relationship between Public Health Scotland and places across Scotland which are distinct and different is really, really welcome. Key thing to the memorandum will be the alliance itself isn't an entity, it's a coalition of willing partners coming together, but the alliance itself can't sign the memorandum of understanding. It will need to have the approval from each individual entity that is a member of the community planning partnership that would then allow Aberdeen City to sign up to the memorandum of understanding. A lot of work's been put into to date to get us to this position. Work continues, and I think it's fair to say it's a fairly high level memorandum of understanding. It's given an indication of the broad areas that we will be focused on, and within that, of course, a focus on continuing to work on our child poverty agenda that we're all already working on. But following the Director of Public Health's work on her statutory report, as a set of partners within the Alliance, we are taking stock of all the activity that's underway. We're looking at the exacerbation of inequality that's taken place. And I think through that analysis, Susan will guide us into, I think, some very discrete areas that we might all want to collectively focus. Once we've got that, then I think we'll express that into a more detailed work plan with Public Health Scotland. But at the moment, we've got the broad memorandum of understanding. It's draft at this stage, it's still a work in progress. We'd welcome feedback from colleagues, and to recognise it's a starter for 10, and our relationship with Public Health Scotland hopefully will flourish, and I'm sure we will come back to refresh the memorandum of understanding. But building on Councillor Cook's earlier comment around how we keep dynamic in our understanding about the exacerbation of health inequality in particular, having a relationship, both obviously with Susan and her colleagues here in the city, our relationship with the HDRC, which is growing, and then our relationship with Public Health Scotland will give us a rich set of data and understanding about where we need to focus. So there is coherence, Councillor Allard, and a relationship for us in the city between the HDRC, which we are building an architecture for. And again, it's fair to say that Public Health Scotland are involved in that collaborative, but we're trying to take that relationship to a full North East relationship, which includes all of partners. So it's here for feedback from colleagues. Any sense either in the meeting or after the meeting whether colleagues in their own institution would be happy to sign up on this, so that we can go back to the Alliance to then say that the community planning partnership, as a result of each entity agreeing, that we could then genuinely say that all partners in the city are happy to sign up. But Councillor Allard, Susan Webb might want to add, and her colleague, who I said did actually all the work on the memorandum, might also want to add a wee bit more to what I've said.
Very good, yes, Susan Webb, thank you.
Thank you, and Alan, please feel free. No, he's shaking his head. I think, Angela, you've given a very detailed introduction. Absolutely, it's a draft, and we hope that we will receive feedback that ensures people feel ownership of it. I think that's very important to us. From my perspective as Director of Public Health, we have a small team based here in the North East. There is a team based in Public Health Scotland nationally. We have complementary skills, and what we hope through this agreement and through coming together at the North East Population Health Alliance, that we are able to direct the support into community planning partnerships, but equally we are able to influence from some of the really good work that goes on in our patch national policy decisions. So a two-way benefit, I hope, for us and Public Health Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a matter of process. It's a draft. It's just for us for information. And has it been shared already to the relevant organization for them to modify or to approve?
That's why it's here today. So grateful if all partners who make up the Aberdeen community planning could go and take it away into their respective organisations, and if they want to provide feedback to myself, Susan and Alan, we'll digest that, and then hopefully we can then provide that feedback back up into the North East Alliance.
Okay, you've got a timetable for that?
Yesterday, obviously, Councillor Allard, would be helpful. I'd like to go at a pace, so we are keen to get this in place. So if we could get comments back from partners, I'm looking at people probably want to be kinder on timeframes than I am after summer recess, and then that would allow, if not sooner.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Everybody is comfortable with us, Councillor Cook.
Yeah, just to say, within Aberdeen Health, City Health and Social Care Partnership, our intention is to bring this for formal approval to the next IJB, which is the 22nd of August. Certainly I've seen it, the Vice Chair's seen it, senior management have seen it, everybody thinks it's a great approach. So I wouldn't anticipate any problems. And I think we would hope to be giving you some feedback in the meantime before IJB does the final sign off, but I think it's a really great approach. And actually maybe Susan or colleagues from Scottish Government would like to comment, because we think it seems to be consistent with our kind of drive towards early intervention and prevention agenda, rather than just sticking plaster when something goes wrong.
That's an invitation for people to comment. If you want to comment, you're very welcome. And I note that the date is the 22nd of August. So if you want the IGB to approve it, we've got to make sure that everybody keeps the final recommendation before the 22nd of August, just to make sure that the draft is not a draft anymore.
There's probably some logistics for us to manage. Susan, we're keen to obviously get all the partners in the city, but conscious that you've got to corral across the whole of Grampian, but we'll need to land a final draft that then people could put. So I wonder if you and Alan might want to, after the meeting, give us a very firm deadline for the city in terms of giving feedback that would then allow you to finalise the document, and then it can be the final version, Councillor Cook, that we're putting into all the city structures, if that's okay.
Just to confirm, very happy to do that. We said we come back to the next North East Alliance meeting, which is towards the end of August. So we'll absolutely do a timeline. I think that, as we said, in terms of the Lloyd refresh, whilst Angela is keen for pace and keen that people feel they've got the opportunity to have the discussions, and so that we can clarify, so that we get ownership around this. This is about building relationships, so it's a start, and I think it's a very important symbolic start to working together. But we'll get a timeline. We'll put it out through Michelle. Thank you.
Good, Mr. Hogg. We are of the same mind, making sure that timeline are important, but got to make sure that people have got time to participate the way they want to participate. So it doesn't need to come back here, I believe. So we'll leave you in your capable hands, making sure that everybody makes the recommendation that we need to make to this draft. Thank you. So we've all noted it, and if there's no more question or comment from the Scottish Government or anywhere else, no, we'll go straight into 2.3, the Scottish Parliament report on community planning, post-legislative scrutiny of Part 2 of Committee on Parliament Scotland Act 2015, and Michelle Cooper again.
Thank you, Councillor Allard. Apologies everyone for the late circulation of this paper. We only received notice of the publication at the end of last week. But you'll all recall that in November, the CPA board was made aware of the Scottish Parliament's inquiry into community planning. Community Planning Aberdeen made a joint submission to the call for views, which I have linked in the report before you today. And I also represented Community Planning Aberdeen at an evidence panel of the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee in March earlier this year. The committee has now published its final report, which is also linked into the paper, but I've drawn out the summary of the 15 findings and recommendations of the committee. Of note is the recommendation that Community Planning Aberdeen is included as a case study example in revised statutory guidance on community planning. Our intention now is to take this to the CPA management group to fully consider the findings of the committee and any implications for Community Planning Aberdeen.
Absolutely. Now we'll take the opportunity to say that on 2.1. It's an additional paper. I hope everybody got additional papers and read it. We are the only one to be mentioned in the summary of finding, as you said. So it's great to see that we will be a case study example in revised statutory community planning guidance. So that's good. But and I did click on the link, and that gave me a better understanding of where we at, which was very timely. Any questions or comments? The recommendations are on the page 6 of the additional papers. If nobody wants to make any comments on your recommendations. We need to know the finding, know the recommendation, and we need to request that the management group to consider the implications of the report for community planning Aberdeen and report back to a future board meeting. So that will be a report back as well. Are we happy for this request for the group to be involved? Yes, Councillor Riley.
Can I just ask what sort of timescale are we looking for the report back? Certainly do it by the next meeting, but
You could do it as the next meeting of an update. Okay, So I will update, I was an meeting depending our agenda is next meeting. Okay, if everybody agree, we'll go to the next point. Thank you very much, Michelle, for this. We're going to CPA improvement program. Sorry, I used an acronym. I shouldn't have. 3.1 improvement program quarterly update. So we got Alison Swanson who will speak about appendix 1. Thank you, Alison.
Thanks, Chair. The report provides members with an update on progress towards the 16 stretch outcomes and the 89 improvement projects spanning both the Lloyd and the community empowerment strategy. So Appendix 1, you can find the detailed overview of progress, and that highlights that of the 16 stretch outcomes at present, 3 have been achieved. And in terms of our 89 improvement aims, 46 of those are live, 12 have ended. You have 6 further project end reports on today's agenda, and we have 10 new charters at Appendix 2 for approval, and Mrs Shepherd will speak to those later. Overall, 19 of the aims have been achieved, and that's not including the aims that were achieved under the previous stretch outcomes that were replaced in April. Of those projects with a red dragon status, the management group discussed those at the last meeting to ensure that progress was now made, and the chairs are connecting in with those relevant projects. Finally, just to highlight that in relation to the improvement aims that were to be achieved by 2022, we had 20 to be achieved, 19 have now submitted project end reports, with the final project end report having been postponed, and that will now come to the next meeting.
Thank you. Any question, Ms. Swanson? No comments? No? So we go straight to Ms. Shepherd. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allard, and I'm very conscious of how long I spoke last time, so I'm going to try and be a little bit briefer. You'll remember at the last meeting of the board, we took a number of project end reports through, and we also presented our refreshed children's services plan. The charters that you've got on the agenda today, I hope you recognise from some of the key themes coming through the plan. Many are linked, so I don't intend to go into any of them in any detail, but happy to take any questions. You'll notice that 4.1 and 4.2 are very much around the child poverty agenda, so a clear link to the report we have later on the agenda. That is recognising that there's a need to support families with income maximisation, pre-birth and with children in the early years, and also look at appropriate provision of formula for babies. So although they sit separately, as a Children's Services Board, we recognise that they're 2 parts of a bigger picture. We then have 2 looking at health assessments, 1 being physical health assessment, 1 being mental health assessment for those who we have responsibility for due to them being care experienced. Again, just to provide some reassurance, the project leads on both of those charters are working together and making sure that actually in terms of how those referrals, if you like, are experienced by the young person, it feels seamless. It doesn't feel like 2 separate processes. So I think when you start getting the reports coming through, you'll see some evidence of that. 6.3 really looks at the supports that are available for our kinship carers. You'll be aware that we are working very closely as a partnership to develop a model of family support, and we would like to see more and more children and young people where they need to be cared for, being cared for within a kinship care arrangement. Some engagement with kinship carers has highlighted some vulnerabilities which we need to work together to address to make sure that our kinship carers are well supported. So that charter looks to address, test some ways of addressing those vulnerabilities. The co-located delivery, I think, is quite an interesting one. So that looks at it and is focused primarily on the Northfield community in the first instance, but actually looks at the needs of the community. So you will be aware that we have a considerable improvement journey ongoing at Northfield Academy, and there is a need to broaden the range of courses on offer. We also, when we look in detail at the community, it is clear that that the community is a little bit of an outlier compared to others within the city, in that there is an extremely high proportion of elderly and also of very young mums. So we're actually wondering how we can join some of these areas together And I guess in my head, to make sense of it, I'm thinking of youngsters within the school who are potentially on a hospitality pathway, supporting and maybe working in partnership with colleagues in health in terms of maybe offering a dementia cafe, for example. So looking to see how we can join up the system a little bit more at community level. So this would be the first test, but I think if we manage to make that work, I think there's huge opportunity there to really use our schools around that prevention and early intervention in a far greater extent than we are doing currently. So I think that's an interesting one to watch. 7.3 is around the breadth of courses. I've probably bored many of you many times around ABZ Campus. This very much looks at the continuation of that, and I guess also links in with that last chart where we're looking at those hospitality pathways. We recognised the vulnerability when we undertook the population needs assessment around our children, around the number of young carers who are actually registered as being a young carer within our system. And we identified within our children's services plan there was a real need to make sure that we were better capturing that. So that's the start of work there. And the final one at 9.2 takes account of some of the real pressures that have been felt by families of those with additional support needs and particularly those with neurodevelopmental needs, and looks to actually bridge some of the gap that families advise us about when they actually aren't yet in receipt of a diagnosis. So again, one part of the work that we're doing to take forward those. We have tried to simplify our charters a little bit more. We tied ourselves in knots a little bit last time. So we tried to have a 2-page limit. We haven't quite managed, but I would hope within the actual charters, it's quite clear in terms of where we're going in the first instance. Obviously, if we don't get the data coming through showing that that's successful, we'll make amendments in terms of our approach. But yeah, that's the charters that are presented today.
Thank you very much. Yes, we could talk all day long about all these fantastic projects, but we haven't got all day. But any comments or any question? Yes, Councillor Kay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a few moments ago, we noted that the Scottish Government were more or less commending Aberdeen's Community Planning Partnership for its very innovative, strong joint working, and I think that we're seeing examples of that. I think we're seeing very clear evidence through this wide range of very effective projects making a difference on the ground, frontline staff and officials working together very, very closely. So it's just wonderful to read about these examples where we're making a difference, improving well-being, we're tackling health inequalities through a variety of different initiatives, and it does need to be imaginative. You do need to be innovative as much as possible now, and I think we're seeing that through for example, through the examples of the financial inclusion pathway, the focus on neurodivergency, the Northfield Hub. We're seeing so much productive partnership work, and I think that demonstrates that we do have an unusually high amount of goodwill amongst the professionals in the city, and I think we're seeing the benefits of that coming through. Just wanted to say that. Thanks.
No, thank you very much, Councillor Clegg, particularly that we have people listening from not from the region, so that'd be interesting to point that out. Me as a first time chair and looking at the paper, I was very impressed by the diversity of the lead partners and on the project manager, and that is good to see, because as around the room we want to make sure that people are the most able to lead this project, and it's got to be and we can see that other people around the room are leading some of this project from different organizations. It's what we want to do. It's not to be all about the council or not all about the NHS, but all our partners as well. Collaborative approach and partnership is very much what it is. Any other comments or question online? Or no, we don't have any more, so we go straight into agreeing. If there is something to agree, we need to approve It's on page 49, so we need to consider the overview of progress towards the 16 future outcomes, and we've done that. It's 89 improvement project. We need to approve the 10 of the project charters. Are we all happy to approve the project charters? Agree. And note the 19 aims, and we've done that and now achieved, and the 12 project end. And the project end reports for 19 20 improvement aims for 2020 to date and now been submitted. So thank you very much for that. If it's all agreed and noted, we can go straight to 3.2, the project and 3.4, increase the number of modern and graduate apprenticeship by 5% by 2022. Another aim, and is Duncan Abernethy from Lescol. Duncan, if you want to take the mic, will be very much appreciated. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Would you like an overview of the project? Is that the?
It'll be very helpful if you
Yeah.
could, if you will.
So the purpose of this project was to increase the number of modern apprenticeship starts by 5%. This particular project has achieved that. That's in modern and graduate apprenticeships. So over the course of the project, we've introduced a number of different tests and implementations. We saw an increase of 68% in graduate apprenticeships and a 36% increase in modern apprenticeships within Nescol's region. That, I guess, conflicted with the a decrease in modern apprenticeship uptakes at that time as well. So it kind of showed that the tests actually worked for the modern apprenticeships in our own particular delivery. So that was interesting. So from my perspective, I think the project has worked. I think we have been beneficiaries, I guess, of quite strong regional activity. But like I say, that goes against the grain when you see a 15% reduction overall, and ours has increased by 36%. So I think the tests have proved worthwhile and achieved the aims of the project, and therefore, you know, we're looking to now end that project going forward.
Okay, I'll look at online or in the room if anybody has any question why this project shouldn't be ended, or any comment about the project. No, so we can all note the achievement and agree that the project can be concluded. Yes, thank you. Maybe you want to stay in the chair, because I think the next one is for you as well, is a project end 3.5.
Yeah, so this is another project that sits with us specifically on modern apprenticeships this time, which aimed to increase the success rates. So this is those that finish their modern apprenticeship with a successful outcome against a baseline of 68.4% and trying to achieve 80%. In this particular case, the project didn't achieve its objectives despite a number of interventions which we still believe in, but haven't seen the outcome. And there seem to be various reasons for that. I think we at the moment seem to be in a place where individuals are leaving jobs where they have apprenticeships rather than not completing the apprenticeship per se. They seem to be leaving the job. So that's had a negative impact on us, which is unfortunate. So it's something we're still looking at. But we have seen a decline in the success rates from 68.4% to 57.1%. I think there's still a COVID reaction here as well, where young people have, to some extent, become used to a more supported environment at home and things like that, and then find themselves in an uncomfortable place now in employment. I also think that compounds with a time when many have held off making decisions about careers and then have been sort of forced to take a decision and said, yeah, okay, I'll try hairdressing, or I'll try automotive, or I'll try whatever, and it hasn't worked out for them, and they've felt the need to go a different direction. And I think those are the compounding issues. We were seeing improvements prior to COVID, and I like to think that the interventions we're now making will balance out and we'll start to see improvements in the future. But again, for the moment, we will, keep going with our interventions with the incentives and things that we've introduced, and working with employers and things, and hope to see the benefits of that coming through. But for the purposes of the project, It hasn't achieved its objectives, but we still look to move to closure and tracking and, as I say, continued implementation of the interventions that we came up with.
Thank you for that. I apologize for the question, but we didn't manage to the aims of the project. So does that mean that was that project? Was it the aims were maybe too difficult to achieve, or was it maybe the project is the circumstances that we had just now was maybe not in the right time to conduct it?
I think it's a difficult environment, is what I would say, in the same way that we were the beneficiary of a very buoyant economy for engineering and things in the last project. I think we're also a consequence of a downturn in some of these areas because of COVID. And like I say, because some people probably have made quite quick decisions in terms of having to try something and then changing their mind. So I don't think the interventions are necessarily wrong, but they may be at the wrong time to see the benefit from them. I think what we're seeing is much more a consequence of a bigger picture and one where people are changing their minds and things like that as well. I think some of the interventions we've got also have longer term benefits that maybe we're not seeing yet. So if we look at core skills, as an example, hairdressing includes core skills. Young people come into hairdressing and do hairdressing. So as soon as you talk about maths or as soon as you talk about numeracy or communications, some can get a little bit turned off, in that particular idea. I talk about hairdressing because that was the way we piloted it. And so we've made some changes to integrate core skills within the training so that they don't necessarily know that they are undertaking core skills, but they are. So it's kind of doing some of these things in the background, and I think that there are a longer term benefit to those things.
Okay, thank you for that answer. You, Crystal Radley?
Thank you. I think it's a really positive programme, although you've not managed to achieve the aims set out. I guess my question is around sort of the future. So do you think that the highlighting of apprenticeships as an option through ABZ Campus will actually improve your sort of take up and retention because people actually understand a bit more what they're signing up for?
I think that's a critical thing. I think communication with the employers and with the young people specifically and parents so that they know more about what they're getting into is definitely going to be helpful. And yeah, absolutely. I think there's a job of work through school and things and through the DYW coordinators and things as well to make sure people do understand the opportunities they're getting into. I think placement opportunities is a great thing as well, so they can experience hairdressing as one example. This goes beyond that, but that's really what this was talking about. And it's the simple things. People don't go into hairdressing knowing they're going to be standing on their feet all day. And that's the common complaint that we often get. I didn't know it was going to be like this. So anything we can do to explain that journey to them, I think, to the young people is going to be helpful.
Is it physically demanding? Angela? Okay.
Thank you, Duncan. It was a really helpful report, and I understand the point that Councillor Radley's making, which is if we get the systemic links, then hopefully it's important. What I was curious about is we've got a kind of generation pandemic here, though, haven't we? And so for these young people that have come off and we weren't expecting this attrition, it's just how much of that is part of pandemic and the resilience. And whilst we can tackle it for going forward, as Councillor Radley said, I guess it's this cohort and us, how do we track as a set of public partners where these young folk go so that if some of what's going on here, Duncan, is just a product of all that went on in the pandemic, these young people are needing more intervention from us. How do we make sure we grab that? Like Councillor Radley, I'm kind of confident that we, with City Campus, we could get people onto the right path at the right time. But it's just generation pandemic. I think we've got to really think about that. So is there ongoing tracking, Duncan, that you and colleagues at NESCOL will do around these young people?
It's a really good question. We don't have a means of tracking them if they leave their employer. They're not, they're no longer an employee, therefore they're no longer an apprentice, beyond a few weeks at the end of their programme. So it becomes very difficult for us to track them unless they come back to college to do something else. So you do raise an important point, but I'm not sure I've got the answer to it. In terms of data tracking, it's a difficult one.
Next, we've got Councillor Martin Clegg.
Thank you, Chair. I thought that the project very helpfully identified core skills as a key factor for many of these young people in their apprenticeships. And I wondered if there was a wider learning outcome to be gained from that. I mean, it's noticeable that also automotive apprenticeships were of a similar level of success stroke failure. And I wondered if any there are any generalizations that can be drawn from this. Should there be more of an emphasis on core skills? Is that something that we should be embedding more with maybe within ABZ campus, highlighting that? I mean, that does seem to be a key initial threshold for so many young people. So should there be a focus on that?
Again, it's a good question. I think core skills is definitely a factor for, I guess, those who are less interested in the academic side of things. You know, they're very much interested in the skills side of things. They're there to fix cars, they're there to cut hair. And so anything we do with core skills that I'm going to say hides it within the programme, it integrates it effectively, and they learn it without necessarily having to focus directly on it, is going to be helpful. Whether there's opportunities elsewhere, then I would say probably yes. I mean, it would be good if they arrived at college with those core skills, or if they go into an apprenticeship with those core skills already made. But you know, sometimes it does need that employment context or that industrial context to be able to understand the reasons they need to know about core skills. So I think there is opportunity there for sure, and it's something we do need to keep looking at. And you know, the automotive performance indicators again is something we're looking very closely at. The initial clues are not that specific. You know, somebody leaves an employer, it's quite hard to get to the real reasons, because you don't often get notification out with the he's left or she's left, and we don't know where they've gone. They've just left. So it can be quite hard to get the real nuggets, you know.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just thought that was really useful to find out that there does appear to be an area of a gap, and we want to close the inequality gaps. So maybe that's an area of educational opportunity that we should be focusing on. Things like all kinds of life skills, socializing skills, oracy. I mean, these are all key core skills, but for many young people, they haven't obtained them, and we expect them to obtain them in fairly routine, maybe traditional ways. So perhaps we need to formalise ways of delivering that area. That's all.
Thank you very much. And before I take Councillor John Cook, I think Helena Shepherd wants to add something to it.
Thank you, Councillor Allard. I'm thinking I can actually pick up on both past questions and maybe just give you a school's perspective on that. So going to the point first around that kind of COVID generation, terrible term, but you'll all understand what I'm describing. I think there is a need for us to understand the impact, and I do think that's maybe a job that I'll pick up with Martin Murchie in his new capacity to see if there's anything that could be done there. I would suggest there's another group of young people, they're probably in around S3 just now, those who are really impacted at the point of transition. So actually, if we can get a bit of a strategy around those who are currently past school age, we can probably actually equally apply that strategy to that second group who are a concern. I would agree with what Angela said. Probably is quite a distinct need for that group. I think absolutely we've thrown everything bar the kitchen sink to wrap around, and I think we've got some really good evidence coming through our Shine mental health surveys that actually we've done a pretty good job of getting ahead of that. But there are signs that those two groups were impacted, and I think there is a need for us as a partnership to understand that, or we can all predict where that may go. So I'm happy to take that to have a little bit of a finger on and to link with Martin. On the core skills, I think there's we deliver core skills from our youngest learners, age 3, all the way through. I think you'll be aware that there have been a number of education reform papers published recently. I think some of the learning that is coming through some of those reform papers is that maybe the language of skills has been a little bit confusing. There are a number of different frameworks, and you may also have heard teachers saying what's a very cluttered curriculum. In some ways, it's because the language is a little bit confusing. So within the education reforms, there's a suggestion that there's a simplification around what we're actually talking about. I think that would help everybody. There's also mention of a potential for a Scottish diploma to be issued at the end of senior fees. Now, obviously, there's a lot for the Cabinet Secretary to consider, and she's asked for a bit of time to consider that. But it is likely that moving forward, the secondary landscape particularly is likely to look really quite different. But I'm more than happy if it would be helpful when we've got all of those publications to just get a paper, just to give everyone an overview of what's potentially on the horizon.
That will be helpful. Thank you very much. Councillor Cook.
Thanks, Camilla. Yeah, it's just a comment really. I don't think we should beat ourselves up because of the fact that we've not met all the targets on one particular project. It kind of strikes me that if you set a number of projects and you achieve all the objectives in all the projects, that probably tells you you're not setting sufficiently stretching targets. And if you're trying to innovate, which is what we are trying to do here, you innovate and you try something and it doesn't work, and that's kind of the nature of innovation. And it's, I'm always reminded of Franklin Roosevelt's one of his sayings, which is, try something. If that doesn't work, try something else. So just that comment really.
Yeah, and absolutely, and I think it's for us also to consider that we're in an exceptional time. So that kind of project might have to be rerun in different time if we feel it's important to do so. Susan Webb.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. And I agree with the comments that have been made. I was just really struck by how do we engage in a way that enables us to capture the learning in case there are things that we could do that could make young people's journey through apprenticeships easier. And I note the paper says in future we'll follow up doing an exit interview, also wondering if there's the opportunity to do something with employers as well to get their feedback. And I'm noting that given the percentages in care as well, we are doing quite a bit of work around apprenticeships. So happy to work with the college and with Eleanor to see if we can come up with something that will enable us to capture learning. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments? Anything we can add? Can we agree with the recommendations? Agreed.
So sorry, just check then. So Susan Webb, so I know that there was the employer event during the test change. I guess what Susan's nudging us, Duncan, is to do a kind of further engagement event with employers around their experience and learning from the programme. So is that something that the group could progress?
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to do some sort of follow-up event, maybe something specific for employers who have lost apprentices, for whatever reason. Maybe we can have some sort of focus group with those and explore some of the reasons with them. That may be more effective if we look specifically at that group. So we would have that information. We do employer surveys anyway, but this would be something quite specific, I think.
So I see them nodding heads. Susan, what do you want to come?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's something about the learning when it doesn't go well, but actually there's something about the learning when it does as well. So maybe just identifying what the difference might be, I think would be really helpful.
The one thing I would say is that I haven't seen, or I've seen very little evidence that it's the learning part that seems to be the issue, particularly in likes of automotive. I think maybe automotive and hairdressing are quite different. We record lever codes on the SDS system, and it's often just candidate has left, and we don't actually have the record of why once or twice you see difficulties with the program or whatever, but you know, I think it would be helpful maybe to get the feedback direct from employers and more of a qualitative feedback. I think would be very helpful.
Yes, and maybe share it with the board. Would be in the form of an update.
I think that would be really helpful. We've got to keep young people in employment when we think about the determinants of, so keeping them as tough as it might be given what they've come through. And I guess there's then what's the partnership support to employers in order to keep young people in these positions. So I think sharing it back with the board would be really helpful, Duncan.
Okay, if I see nothing there heavily, it's what we will have. We'll have an update. Thank you very much, Ross. Very much appreciated. So we'll go to 3.4 project, and 10.7 is the turn of John Donahue to speak about the project.
Thanks for the opportunity to come along and present today. I think it's probably important to describe the background to this project, which was really born out of the staff that worked in the criminal justice social work department, and also Kitty Brewster recognising that a large number of their clients were experiencing and describing and exhibiting mental health kind of issues on a continuum from mild symptoms to, you know, mental illness. And really looking to find more effective ways to support those individuals as opposed to the traditional routes, I guess, into specialist mental health service, which were really the only option that they had available to them. So if they identified an individual who needed support, they would make a referral to a community mental health team. Maybe the person would get an assessment from a psychiatrist or a community mental health nurse, or maybe they wouldn't because they didn't meet the threshold for, you know, for that service. So I guess that says something about the individual's worth then to them if they were rejected, you know, if we call it that, by those teams. And coincidentally or in parallel, the Scotland's mental health strategy, one of the actions related to increasing the workforce around 4 key areas, but 2 of them being prisons and also custody. So I've been involved in a parallel piece of work with police colleagues to look at those pathways, individuals that were coming into contact on a regular basis, and just interrogating the information that they had in relation to how affected they were by distress, mental health issues, and the solutions that were available to them. And again, the traditional approach would be that they would seek out, you know, or encourage a referral to specialist mental health services, go and see your GP, describe to them how you're feeling, whatever. But actually, when we looked at the data that we had, it was clear that less than or more than 80% of those individuals didn't need a specialist kind of approach to treatment or intervention at that level. So so we designed something a little bit different, which was a kind of call it a demedicalized pathway. And so not using traditional routes of support or treatment, but to look at something else, in which I've heard folk mention innovation, and we believe this was quite innovative. And I think that's still the case, because when I've been engaging with national colleagues around about Action 15 stuff, which is about increasing the workforce in A&E, custody, prison, and primary care, what we really wanted to do was direct people away from those areas and look at something as an alternative. And so that's the kind of background to this. So that's why we've called it demedicalized and compassionate conversation. So it's not, we're never looking at treatment, we're looking at an intervention. And that intervention being something very simple, which was simply to have a conversation with someone when they presented in custody or HMP granting or with criminal justice social work, to ask, well, how are you? How would you describe, you know, your well-being, and what have you tried to do to support or make changes around about that? Because we know that the majority of those individuals are coming from very chaotic backgrounds. They've had poor outcomes in a number of different ways, struggle to express their distress in kind of adaptive ways. So come to the attention of criminal justice, you know, prison, courts, whatever. And so we looked at engaging with those individuals on every occasion and seeking more information from them and make suggestions to them as part of that conversation about what they could do to affect change for themselves, as opposed to ask for a referral to, mental health or a referral to GP or medication. So it was moving away from this is an illness and you need a medical response to something about this is lifestyle. This is about how you express the stress. This is how you work with relationships and others and employment and a range of kind of complex issues to affect some change. So that's kind of the background to this, but it's maybe not so clear in the description of the project about what we tried to achieve. And we set an aim which was just a guesstimate of 10%, but actually we've achieved a lot more than that. But I think some of that achievement is down to, as the project has moved forward, our reporting and data collection systems have become much more aware of the information we needed to have, and that's why it looks as if we've achieved much greater improvements than we maybe set out to do on the outset. So that's a very rough sketch of why we decided to do what we did, and the report then demonstrates where we got to. So I'm happy to take questions right with that if that's the best way to proceed.
Yes, Angelica.
John, thank you for the report. It's really positive to see. I'm just trying to get my head around. So just in section 5.4, I think you're saying that there's ongoing discussion with colleagues at Royal Cornhill on the unscheduled care team around the pathway. So presumably that pathway's to get this really embedded. What sort of struck me was just the pathway, I guess, across the entirety of the criminal justice footprint. So we've got here Kitty Brewster in terms of custody, then we've got the court system, and then we've got the prison system. So it's got to be a joined up whole pathway of mental health, isn't it, that's following that individual. So if we're in custody, and then we're going from custody, and then we're being presented at court, and then we're going from court and we're going into prison, then that mental health pathway that you're in discussion with Royal Cornhill's going to have to work across that whole system. John, that's my assumption around in that shorthand that you've used in the committee report on 5.4.
Yeah, I guess part of the complexity of this project was it was in 3 different areas. I think on reflection, 3 separate areas would have been different, maybe easier to manage as well. But it was very difficult to pull something together that met all of the needs of all of the areas, if that makes sense. The pathway in relation to Kitty Brewster and on-schedule care was born out of the test of change, insofar as we looked to increase the opportunities within the custody suite to have an alternative to the forensic medical examiner, for example, or a psychiatrist coming down to do an out-of-hours assessment and someone presenting with concerning symptoms within the custody suite. So Well Aberdeen are a service provided by Penumbra, who are a third sector partner. So as part of our Action 15 parallel process, they're employed to provide some additional support to custody. But what they are not are mental health practitioners. So what they need at times is some decision support opportunities. So if they meet someone and they believe the threshold for risk for individuals is higher than what they can manage, then we're looking to develop a pathway that means they can access decision support through RCH as opposed to making a referral to RCH. So it's a test. And if that were successful, it could be rolled out to other areas similarly, like the courts or alternatives. The challenge with that is that because they're a third sector partner, we don't have an information sharing agreement that allows us to share information with them. So that's been a barrier to progress, and it remains a barrier to progress in a number of projects that we're engaged with. And it's external to this actually. With third sector partner, that commissioning process has proven challenging between health and third sector partners. So does that answer your question?
It does. It says to me we're still on the journey of tests of change, John, which I absolutely get, and I think the board would be interested in continuing to hear that test of change journey in terms of custody and then how we're going to move across. So we're not saying it's an established clinical pathway yet that we're saying is solid. We're saying we're still on a kind of testing journey. I think we should keep bringing that back in here because ultimately, and I don't mean to sound ungrateful, this is still a downstream. It's not a preventative pathway. So we are trying to appropriately support people when they are presenting. So this is important work, I guess, as a whole system for us to get this complete. So we get ourselves back upstream in terms of our mental health kind of preventative stuff. So I think because you're still proposing to be in another testing cycle as you go through the kind of different places, I think we should keep bringing that back to the board.
Can I just reply to that?
Yeah.
I'm not entirely convinced that we are downstream, if that makes sense, because I think what we're trying to do is look at engaging with those individuals at point of contact much earlier and in a way which is about an intervention rather than a treatment, so they can identify lower threshold levels of distress and have a conversation with someone and signpost them or help them engage with other parts of the system that can begin to ameliorate those kind of symptoms, if you want to call them that, as opposed to wait until it gets worse and then get a referral to specialist services. So the bit about a link to unscheduled care really is in relation to those where it's a lot worse and it falls out with the skill set of the individuals within those key settings to feel comfortable to manage that level of presentation. So it's a very discrete little bit of this, if that makes sense. So I think the focus was really about doing something quite different as opposed to, again, having a medical pathway into treatment, to something that should, if the intervention is earlier, make it less likely that needs to be the pathway, if that makes sense.
Yeah, very much a soft approach. Yeah, Angela.
It's a early intervention, prevention, intervention, but it's still at the downstream end, John. So there's kind of oxymoron in there, isn't there? And so it's, I guess we're coming back to tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3. You're describing an earlier intervention, but essentially folk have presented, and I'm not taking away from the value of doing that, but it's not right at the top end of prevention. And I guess from a partnership point of view, that's where we're trying to kind of move ourselves. So it would be right for us to be impatient about trying to improve those earlier interventions at the downstream in order that we can progress that to release our collective capacity to genuinely get to the prevention. So people are not presenting in any of these settings that you've described, but that's a massive journey that we're kind of collectively going on. So it is welcome. I think you're just still in a testing cycle. So given that it's not into an established pathway, I think we should keep cited to support you. And you articulated some of the barriers that you're facing, particularly on information. This board is here to help with barriers that we're all experiencing within the CPP. So I think it's useful to unpack that, perhaps through the management group. A lot more, Gail, who chairs the management group, and a number of colleagues are in this room. We should unpack that for you more in the management group to see what colleagues can do to help to address that, so there are no information governance barriers.
Before you respond, John, I wanted to maybe add something.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's night and day in terms of the support that's provided within custody settings in terms of mental health. However, when I just look at the purpose of it in terms of increasing by 10% the number of clients who can access mental health services in police custody, I think they've already failed that they're in police custody and mental health has brought them there. The impacts of mental health and policing are significant, and I've undertaken through screening boards right across Aberdeen, Aberdeenshire and Moray to send a paper on the impacts of mental health on policing. And I earlier spoke of direct measures that seem, part of criminal behaviour we're seeing is off the back of mental health And in amongst this, you know, one of the options I think policing is screaming out for is not to take them into police custody to access it, but not to take them to a police setting at all. Take them to a setting where they can get that early intervention, treat their criminal behaviour as not all the time. There's clearly many occasions there's criminal behaviour that needs to be dealt with as such, but there are behaviours that police have to get involved in, but it's where do we take them? And what we're seeing just now is take them to Kitty Brewster, because you might get that there. Police have to do that. Take them to Royal Cornwall Hospital. Police have to sit there for 4 hours, sometimes more. Take them to the health setting. Police have to sit there for 6 hours, 8 hours for assessment, for them to be then released. And police then have to then think about where are we taking them. It would not be the first occasion that somebody's played out behaviours that police have to intervene, take them to a healthcare setting, sit for several hours to be then saying they're fit to be arrested and taken into police custody. And we keep them overnight, not because it's the right thing to do, but to try and keep the public safe or keep themselves safe from the public. And then they get put to the court, they get assessed, fit to be released and bailed. And I could cite many examples again where that person then has another moment of crisis. And again, the police come in and do it. So a bit of a kind of pitch there around about the impacts of this, just to really get across. And it's probably what Angela's speaking about as well. You know, I don't think we should celebrate, you know, increasing 10% within health setting, and I don't mean that within police custody or any custody. I don't mean that in any disrespect. I think we've failed, you know, if we're only measuring it within a police custody setting or any custody setting that's trying to actually think about a way of not getting them into there, they can get that support without having to come into a custody setting, if that makes sense.
It does, and I mentioned the parallel piece of work that I've engaged with around about Action 15. That's specifically doing that. So the LOIP kind of project doesn't identify all of the work that we're doing because it was criminal justice, Kitty Brewster, and the prison who wanted this approach. And the alternative approach that we're also working on and have now in place since July 2021 has been to contract a third sector provider, Penumbra, to do exactly what you've just outlined. So Well Aberdeen are available 7 days a week from 10 a.m. until 10 p.m. to provide an alternative to police having to take an individual to Cornhill. So they've been engaging with frontline policing regularly for the last 8 to 10 months, I guess, to look at changing the culture, changing the language, changing the reliance on the traditional pathways to do something different. And so that in itself has been a challenge, because it's about those organisations who have traditionally seen Cornhill as a place for lights on, whatever, and similarly, you know, the police as a safeguarding institution, to begin to trust a different provider. So those relationships are ongoing, and they ebb and flow. So I'm keen to see the referrals from Police Scotland, frontline colleagues, to Well increase, and we engage. Well, Penumbra engage regularly with the sergeants for a couple of areas within the city, Kitty Brewster, and also I've forgotten the other, I think it's Tory, to look at, with it, kind of match the priority neighbourhoods, to look at exactly at that, but also to look at a self-referral route for individuals who would previously have maybe sought out, you know, support from their GP to recognise distress and to engage with Penumbra and the peer support workforce that we're also developing as part of that process. So I guess that's what I was meaning about the upstream. You know, this is, you know, I understand a bit about downstream because folk are already in custody. So that was our cohort to work with. But actually, parallel to this, we're working with a huge, you know, cultural change out with that. So this kind of doesn't really reflect all of the work that's been ongoing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just wanted to check that Penumbra doesn't have the same barriers that you had with the free settings.
It's specifically that's a challenge. So if a GP sees someone and thinks Penumbra could support that individual, I'll make a referral. You can't share information. And similarly, Penumbra can't engage with them because each GP is a the independent contractor, and they need to sign their own information sharing agreements, etc. And it's just a minefield.
Can I take Suzanne Webb on?
I wasn't coming into the minefield of information governance, but again, I think we are taking those examples and we are working through the health and care system as to how we can address those. I guess I've sat around this table many times where we have highlighted the challenges around mental health, some of which will be led rightly through the Integrated Joint Board, some will come through community planning, and I just wondered whether the community planning management group working with IJB could just paint a bit of a picture of all of the work that's going on, what's coming through community planning, what's coming through IJB, just to give us that sense. And the second thing I was going to highlight, and Simon is at the back. So Simon, as part of the North East Population Health Alliance, we had an event on Monday, and at that event, it was about bringing decision makers together with those with lived and living experience, and some of the stories that were told on Monday, I think would add a different dimension to some of the work that we're doing. So again, I'm wondering, Simon, if we could take that into the community planning management group and just consider all of that, because that might just help us do a check that we are focused in on all of the areas that we need to be focused on.
Before I take John Councillor Cook, are we happy to take that to the group?
It's probably not for me to commit. Gail is the chair of the management group. I mean, I think we do have a line of demarcation that any activities that are health and social care only, Councillor Cook and Sandra are taking all that through the IGB. But the rule of thumb in terms of the CPP is anything that involves other partners beyond the health and social care should be coming into the CPP and the CPP sort of subgroup. So that second area of activity that John was describing that has a direct relationship with police, I would have kind of thought that one would be landing in here, although obviously the IGB would have an interest. So I think on that specific one we'll just test, because I had understood that we had kind of good handle on the sort of demarcation between the activities that get reported into the IGB and what's coming into to here.
Yeah, so I guess what I was thinking is, because often when I think you were describing a piece of work and some of the questions were, what about what about this issue over here, which is happening through the IJB? And there's something about, could we just map some of that out so we get a picture? And it may be that we don't change reporting relationships, maybe we do based on the criteria, but I just think that would help Police Scotland colleagues just get the sense of the totality of what is happening, pulling in the data that you'll gather, pulling in the information that we've gathered through the event on Monday. I think that would just give us a more rounded picture.
Yeah, I think it's just to remind IGB colleagues, so community planning partnership is not health and social care, and Susan, you know the weight that comes with that. But whenever we're in a multidisciplinary, multi-agency, then that activity should be getting reported into the CPP subgroup of where Police Scotland would be. So I suspect that given the significance of that agenda on the health system, it's been pushed into understandably a scrutiny and a supportive around it through the lens of the IGB. It's also remembering actually that's a really important project for the demand that Police Scotland absorb on behalf of the health and social care system. So I'm not sure, I think we've got normal lines of demarcation and Susan on it, but I think I'll just double check on why this one's not kind of been coming in through the CPP, because it's absolutely not to take away from work that colleagues have been doing on the downstream, but naturally Graham would have been more interested in the kind of the far more upstream. So the fact he wasn't cited on it is just saying we've maybe not got it coming into the right subgroup within the CPP. So I'll check in on that one.
I think it was Tigris on board will take because it's on Cook.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up, I was going to talk about something else, but just as a follow up to that discussion, I'm absolutely not precious. Don't care about demarcation issues. Susan's point is absolutely correct. We need to address it. So whether it comes to IJB or this group or another group, I don't really care as long as we address the issue. I think it's important to say that. In terms of the kind of the broader piece, I do agree this is early intervention rather than prevention, but I actually think it's really good stuff. I think one of the issues for me is that all the stats show, and I think this goes for most Western countries, in any given year, 1 in 4 of us will have some sort of mental health issue. And if I kind of look around the room and count the numbers and think 1 in 4, okay. So that gives you the kind of the magnitude of the challenge on the prevention side. And also part of the issue is, the other thing to add to that is the 1 in 4 number doesn't seem to have shifted for years and years and years and years. And it doesn't seem to have shifted whether you're looking at the USA or the UK or Scotland or Germany or France. So it's a massive challenge to get the prevention side right. In terms of early intervention, I think part of the challenge again is that if you've got a more serious mental health issue, you're coming from a chaotic lifestyle, therefore you don't contact anybody. Alternatively, if you've got a less serious mental health issue, there's a stigma attached to it, so you don't contact anybody. So actually coming into the criminal justice system is a really good place to make the contact and do the early intervention. So I'm just hugely supportive of this. And I've got 2 questions. One for the police, which is, I'm not surprised about the thing you described about the amount of time officers are spending on this. How can we help? What do you need changed so that gets fixed? And it could be something here, or it could be something where we need to be lobbying government nationally. So what can we do to help? And in terms of John's point around, I think you made the point that there are some training and skill set issues in the folk that you're talking about. Again, what can we do to help on that? What needs to get fixed? And if you can work out what needs to get fixed, we can maybe try and do something about it.
So I mentioned earlier that I'd undertaken, because our Chief Constable many times and other senior leaders within policing have kind of outlined the demand on policing in the sense of the impacts of mental health, and I've thought about that long and hard in the sense of how do I kind of localise that for ourselves here, and trying to bring it to life a little bit so that everybody can understand generally what we're speaking about, and I can illustrate some points there in terms of it will not be the first time, and it happened last night, and I'm certain it'll happen again tonight, that 2 police officers will spend an entire night shift sitting beside somebody in a health setting, to look after them, for them to be released and then to be taken into police custody. That'll happen tonight and it'll happen tomorrow night. That happens all the time. So what I've undertaken to do is we've done, as Chief Inspector Darren Bruce in the back of the room through his team and the partnerships team, is kind of set out what the impacts of mental health on policing are. The paper was going to be getting presented at next week. However, I read it myself. Councillor Radley have asked for it to be taken back. So I think it needs wider consultation, because I think when it's put out there, I think it's only fair that everybody has sight of it for a discussion, because this isn't about us trying to say, look what we're doing, can you all step up? It's very much a collaborative. We've got an absolute role in this because, don't get me wrong, there's some really challenging people out there with challenging issues that police have to have a role in to keep them safe, to keep the wider community safe. It's just that we sometimes feel a little bit helpless in terms of seeing, the point in crisis this individual is, and we can't get the help that we think, and our police officers are doing their best. but ultimately they themselves know it's not enough and they need it. So I think if we can set this paper out and allows partners to kind of just see it in black and white in terms of what we're actually meaning when we say the demands on policing, and opportunities, but work together as a collaborative, and never intended for this to be trying to shame anybody into call of action. Far from it. It's just so a single agency understanding, or single agency telling the story of what it's impacting upon us. So I think that paper might be really helpful to set out exactly what I'm saying.
No, that was very helpful, and it's not a question of shaming. We need to address this point. John, you maybe want to respond to the question of Councillor Cook?
Just quickly comment on that. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't pointing the finger at all. It just strikes me that you guys are basically social workers with a blue light some of the time, and it should be a multi-agency approach. So yeah, I just wanted to be supportive, not critical.
That's exactly how I heard it.
Okay.
I think, as I understood, it was in relation to training.
Yeah.
And I guess it depends. I think Angela mentioned the tiers of provision. So tier 1 versus tier 4 in terms of someone's health needs, which means that you have a tiered approach to the staff that are in these settings as well. So I guess there's thresholds of expertise that are appropriate to the population that you're working with in each of the settings. And the question then, I think, that maybe prompted this charter was, when we feel that threshold of expertise is beyond where we need to be, what can we do differently? And the different response was traditionally to make a referral to specialist mental health services. But similar to the police, when someone has an assessment, they don't meet the threshold for care or treatment ordinarily. So this was about, well, can we do something that demedicalizes that approach and looks at a compassionate, engaging conversation? And if that individual then needs a level of risk, or demonstrates a level of risk that needs to be stepped up, the traditional treatment as usual options are still there. So they haven't changed. Those pathways of support, we're always in the background floating around. So
thank you for this. Councillor Radley, you wanted maybe to add and talk about this paper as well. We having different convener of different committees, and we've got to make sure that we don't duplicate too much as well.
Thank you. I welcome the paper in front of us. I think it does highlight some very important issues as well. I've spoken at length with Ms. Mackey around impact of the sort of mental health crisis and the acute mental health crises that Police Scotland are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And while it's positive that we are sort of demedicalising the approach in police custody, community disposal, and in the prison service as well, I actually really welcome the sort of joined up thinking approach that you've suggested. I think we need to understand where our support is and where that support is best placed. I personally don't think that 2 police officers sitting in a mental health crisis with someone overnight is a great use of police resources, but I understand that at the moment there's not the other resources to be able to mitigate against that. So I think really having an understanding of where our resources are and where they are best placed would be really, really helpful to come through this board. We all have different expertise, we all come from different backgrounds and institutions that we all really need to work together to get this under control. The mental health, I hesitate to use the word pandemic in these days, but it really is, it is all consuming. It is all of our constituents, all of our service users are experiencing some form of mental health, whether that be good, whether that be bad. And I really do think we need to have that understanding of where the support is, where it's best placed to be, and how we can work together to sort of get control of it. I will leave it there. I'm interested to hear what some of the other people have got to say, but I welcome the improvement that we've seen, but I do think we need to sort of have a good look at where everything is going as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor Craig, wanted to add something?
Data gathering at the Kitty Brewster through the Kitty Brewster project is crucial and needs to be secured for the future, because that's the means of providing the evidence for having a strategic for measuring the strategic value of what's been happening there. So hopefully that is secure. Hopefully the analytical capacity is secure. Hopefully there is sufficient of it in order to sustain that important data gathering.
Thank you, and I've got to say I'm delighted of the innovative approach that was presented in front of us, especially the democratization of the approach, which is exactly what we want to see. But that poses a problem: is where does it sit? You know, and I think we may need to see in the recommendation we've got in front of us. Are we happy with the recommendation in front of us? Because it doesn't say that it sits either with us or somewhere else. It's in fact somewhere else. Do we want to have some follow-up on this, or are we quite happy to have this ending and concluded?
Well, I think if we take sort of Susan and John's steer around that, and obviously we don't want to duplicate reporting that if John's already committed to reporting into the IGB, then we should leave it there. If not, and there's an opportunity to look at this from a whole system perspective, then we can bring it back here. So Councillor Allard, if you're content that we just have an offline conversation as officers, and then we can confirm which direction it's going to go.
Everybody's content with that? Maybe Vice is content with that? Because
No, absolutely, and I'm content as well in the sense that I mentioned this paper, this mythical paper that does exist, that in itself, I'm absolutely certain it will prompt conversation in a positive way. And so I think that there's enough structures in place now that this ain't getting lost.
If I can just, it might be helpful to have an understanding of where them sort of offline conversations go as well, because obviously this is going to be reported through my committee in public protection, and having an understanding of where this further action is going would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, advice, it could be part of the refreshment of the LOIP as well as a goal outcome improvement plan. Are we happy for it to be part of this, or do we want it to be separately? Abiva?
Sorry, I was just going to highlight, as you've said, that the final recommendation is suggesting that this now be considered as part of the LOIP refresh, because in recognition that that piece in terms of the improvement around the community justice aspect hadn't yet been completed. So intention was that wider landscape would be considered as that, and a refreshed improvement aim as appropriate, taking on board in terms of the more upstream aspect, in recognition of, in terms of technical, the wording of that aim had been achieved.
So leave it to then.
So Graham's report will go to Councillor Radley's committee, which will then have a conversation. John will have access to Graham's report through Councillor Radley's report, and then as a CPP board, we'll take it forward within the CPP, the LOIP refresh then.
Yeah, and if we can have those reports as we're preparing all of the project plan in terms of the LOIP refresh, we can make sure that those are all reflected in, so that the relevant outcome improvement groups are considering that as they are developing their revised aims.
Sorry. Okay, so it means that we don't need to change the recommendation. We are all happy to agree with the recommendations. John is happy with that as well. Just make sure you wrote us to that question. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Let's go to the next one, which is 3.5, and you've got John Money, Public Health Scotland, to speak on the project. Yes, thank you very much, John. Very much appreciated.
I should just correct the affiliation. First of all, it's NHS Grampian, the Public Health team. Public Health Scotland. So a bit of background about the project. It's around alcohol brief interventions. For those of you not aware of that, it's basically they're among the best evidenced interventions for reducing risky alcohol consumption. Around 1 in 8 people given a short questionnaire on their alcohol and the impact alcohol's having and drinking's having in their lives will go on to reduce drinking to a less harmful level. So the aim of the project, the principal aim of the project, as you'll see in the report, was to restore primary care alcohol-brief interventions to levels which were at 2017, 2018. As I'm sure is not lost on committee members, there's been a number of issues in primary care in particular that have that continue to frustrate the number of face-to-face consultations, although that has increased. And so just mainly through the pressures in primary care, the principal objective has not been reached in terms of bringing that back up to 2017-18. But there is a number of good news takeaways, if you like, as well, in that in the latter part of 2022, intervention started up again in primary care. The local enhanced service agreement started up across, and so they're continuing to. There's a slight downward trend in the last quarter, but I'm not quite sure. We may dissect that in the open session. And there's the project as a whole involved 7 tests of change. I was interested in the Roosevelt quote earlier on: if what you're doing is not working, then do something else. So that project did involve a number of tests of change, including 3 new settings, so prisons, and the custody suites and link workers across a number of other wider settings. Two of the most promising takeaways of that were, and projects we're just actually starting, are the involvement of housing officers. So housing officers are now being trained. Graham Gardner, the head of the city housing team, has embraced this really enthusiastically. So they are now being trained up, and as you might appreciate, that's potentially a better means of reaching the real target cohorts of male blue-collar workers who maybe turn up at their family doctor once every couple of years. So to reach that cohort, it's probably a much more targeting 22,000 social housing tenants is probably a much more feasible kind of route to capture those. The evidence base in the wider settings is not as strong as primary care, but I would say that's not a reason for discontinuing that. Much more so, that's a reason for doubling down in the wider settings and enhancing the evidence base. And we've got a collaboration with the university to look at evaluating some of those wider settings as well. So on the whole, as I said, the project didn't meet its principal objective, there's been of the order of 167% increase in 22-23 from the previous year, and that's across all settings. And it's a total of 1,078 actual interventions. So I think there's a number of positives to take away from the project. It was the proposal to the board that we actually they actually now close this, and the brief interventions continue on a kind of business as usual format. But bearing in mind some of the comments that have come out and previously, maybe the board members might wish to reflect on whether we look at a refresh on wider settings and downplay the primary care part. So I'll leave that up to members' input and questions. Thanks.
Yes, it's for board members to tell us. Any wants to participate in the discussion and respond to the call? No. Yes, Councillor Cook.
Yeah, thanks. With my IJB hat on, I'm acutely aware of the pressure on primary care. So the other thing is, I noticed in the paper that we talk about using link workers. I think it says 3 of them were identified as champions. I think it's about 20 in total across the city, and I know that the feedback on the value of link workers from GPs is very, very good. It's like, you ask them, do people think they're doing a good job? And the answer comes back 90% say yes. So yeah, I'm favourable to this approach, but I'm just acutely conscious, as I say, of the other pressures that primary care is under. So I'm not quite sure what the answer is.
Okay. I'll take other comments and then answer that as well first.
Simon wants to say something right now, yeah.
I think there's opportunities to, as part of the business as usual, and working with primary care colleagues and enhanced services colleagues to look at social prescribing and how we maybe sort of offer this as an add-in to primary care that's not specifically about a GP doing it. So there's multidisciplinary staff in practices. So the nursing staff and pharmacy, community pharmacy, etc. So primary care is a whole suite of opportunity, I think, without putting more pressure on GPs. Having said that, at a recent meeting with the clinical lead in the city, she was sort of articulating that ABI should be part of just being a good GP in terms of healthcare. So I think there's an acceptance that there's a valuable preventative element to it, and it should just be part of good practice, and we shouldn't really be presenting it as an additional ask of them in any sense. So.
That makes sense.
Yes, and then we talked about links workers, we're talking about housing officers. Is there any other groups of people who can help?
Yeah, well, there's another spin-off that I didn't chance to mention, and that's the Alcohol and Drugs Action. I've developed an online sort of ABI tool, which they are now piloting and is now gathering information. I suppose the most potentially useful aspect of that, the problem of gathering data, reliable data, and custody suites in particular was mentioned earlier on. If the electronic tool could be used as a means of gathering of using it in the wider settings, that's a much better means of collating and getting the data from those settings. So yeah, so there are that's another sort of means of expansion, even potentially including as part of eConsult with the GP system as well. But so those are things that were at the periphery of this project, were also being considered, but didn't really make it into terms of a full test of change.
Okay, I think we've explored all the avenue. Anybody wants to add anything? Yes.
Yeah, it's just to endorse Simon's comments. For quite a number of years, we've had conversations with general practice in particular, and I think it's they reassure us, they ask quite the question, but it's the recording that was an area that they find a challenge. So welcome the recommendation that this will be taken into the Lloyd refresh as part of the Alcohol and Drug Partnership. I think that picks up your comment, John, around the wider settings. I think we do need to keep momentum on this, and I do believe the wider settings is an area we should be exploring further. I'm very content that it's taken through the Lloyd process. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you very much. I think that's, yeah.
Okay, John,
that.
if John's agree with it, so I just got it.
Thank you, Councillor Allard. Just in terms of those wider settings, so given the target population that you described who don't frequent general practice and other kind of health settings, but we probably understand where they do frequent, I guess it's then what that different model would look like that actually is not involving statutory partners. So I think it might be useful to get some research that's evidencing there was a lot of work done previously before around for females presence at bingo halls, for example. So it's understanding we've got a football club in the city that attracts how many male people in Aberdeen. So John, it'd just be interesting to understand what those wider settings could be. And I should know the answer to this, and I've forgotten. I can't recall where we're at with the ABI approach for under 16s. I thought there was a test of change looking at that. Does anybody know where we're at on that one?
I'm not absolutely sure. Simon.
I'm not familiar with that one either. I'm not sure there's an evidence base for young people, I think that the style of drinking might be slightly different. We have succeeded in securing funding from Cora for some navigator workers to be based at Royal Children's Hospital as a means of dealing with young people who have drunk to the level of high intoxication that they need to go to hospital. So there is an opportunity in there, and with adult navigators at A&E to build up those wider settings. And coincidentally, I was trying to get in touch with bingo halls about something else, so but it's just been ignored. So if anybody's got any contacts, it would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely scope for more wider settings, and the examples you mentioned are really useful. I was involved in a previous project in another post, which actually looked at community pharmacies and also at off licenses and supermarkets, and the biggest audit scores, the biggest scores in the questionnaire were actually, might not surprise you to learn, were from the supermarkets where people go to buy alcohol. So so there's probably some mileage in exploring, as you say, those wider settings further and using a refresh to do that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments online or in the room? No. So we're happy to agree with the recommendation. Yes, thank you very much. So we'll move to the next one, which is 3.6, which is this time Fraser Hogan from Alcohol and Drug Action on project N12.5. Is Fraser?
Thank you, Chair, colleagues. So obviously 12.5, the context there was about increasing the number of people engaging in alcohol services. The context around this is obviously one around COVID, where we saw obviously our interactions in 2020 into 2021 with the restrictions in terms of the lockdowns, etc., where we saw a reduction in terms of footfall, in terms of seeing people. So obviously trying to look at different ways to work and different ways to try and engage people and to obviously get back to increasing and getting more access and engagement with the general public. So very much a whole population approach. So one where we've looked through how to reach into communities of need and across the city and improve the referral processes, smooth those processes, and make it easier for people to access and indeed for other professionals to make referrals to us directly. And then a wider approach really where we've looked at mechanisms through press and social media and trying to actually just open up and engage with people fairly anonymously, but very successfully in terms of attracting individuals to complete an online tool, which John had referenced there, which is basically the screening element of an alcohol brief intervention, the screening and the feedback element. And that has been highly successful in terms of attracting the right demographic in terms of the numbers of at-risk drinkers, and then particularly those in the highest risk categories. So all in all, I'm really pleased to report that we've seen far more than the 10% increase that was set out. So across the postcode areas, the three priority areas, a 35%, 59%, 66% increase in engagement. And interestingly, in the wider, so all other areas, if you like, within Aberdeen City, 112% increase. That sounds extremely high. It is, I guess, but what I suppose this maybe acknowledges is that we were aware, obviously, that during lockdown periods, for example, we were aware people are obviously still have access to alcohol, still have the financial means to buy alcohol, and importantly, the time to drink alcohol. So we were quite anticipating that we would start to see some of that starting to play out, and here we have obviously a huge increase in people getting in touch and engaging with us in terms of that kind of wider population. Looking through all the other aspects, the one I'd probably draw attention to is the campaign element as well, which was Foo's Your Booze was the title of that one. And again, as mentioned there, a high proportion of, in terms of the gender mix with females, which we do know from previous campaigns that does tend to attract more women in terms of actually engaging with us. And again, the percentage of people in the at-risk categories was very, very high. So something we know that we can utilise again in terms of taking things forward as part of kind of business as usual, and how we sustain obviously some of the improvements. This doesn't cost a huge amount to do. It's very cost effective in terms of reach. So the risk elements to that are quite low. But obviously, and I'll speak a little bit in the next charter as well, a little bit about how we've had to obviously change and adapt how we deliver our services through COVID, now post-COVID, what that learning looks like and how we're adapting around that. So again, just to say that we're obviously delighted that the reach has been there, and obviously the percentages show very high response for engagement and support and treatment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that work for engagement. For sure, the numbers can show it. Any comment and question from anybody in the room? For one night. No. Do we want to agree the recommendations and go straight to the next one, Fraser, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you're not getting rid of me so easily. I'm also now 12.8 as well. So again, in a different way, more targeted, I guess, because obviously the drug using population is very specific in Aberdeen, but obviously this one has come on the back of obviously reviewing drug-related deaths and obviously looking at, I guess, those opportunities for earlier intervention. We do know that if we get interventions to people early, if we get them into treatment, we get them into structured support, that obviously that has an impact in terms of their well-being, and obviously potentially reduces again fatal overdoses and other harms that people endure. So again, a number of different ways of working, which again, this probably reflects the wider partnership approach. So ADA are only one strand, one element, an important cog within the structure. So obviously looking at things like assertive outreach, where we're kind of changing the model in terms of actually seeking out people at the points of crisis that they are in. And obviously our service, ADA, instead of being a passive service, i.e. waiting for people to make contact with us, waiting for people to turn up, if you like, at the door. Instead, no, we are actually going out and basically arriving at people's doors or people's localities, wherever they are comfortable seeing us, but basically being far more proactive in engaging people generally in terms of getting that access to a number of services. That includes injecting equipment, naloxone, various forms of harm reduction, bloodborne virus testing, but most importantly, getting people into structured treatment as well. So our sharp response service was something that we started to pilot during the COVID period as a way of working differently to try and make sure that we were able to engage people, because obviously for a while it was not easy for people to get to us, so we had to get to them. So fortunately we were able to pick up CORA Foundation funding through the Scottish Government, and we're now just completed year 1 of 5 of the sharp response funding, and I'm delighted again to see a 20% increase in the uptake of drug treatment generally, and obviously that engagement through ADA as well. So basically the tests that have been there and the partnership working that we have, obviously we need to acknowledge all the other partners within the ADP that help contribute to this as well. Obviously that model of working now, obviously we need to mainstream more and more, and our learning that we've taken from being able to deliver things in a more mobile and flexible way, and the ways that we're being able to gather intelligence and act on it more quickly through assertive outreach is obviously extremely important. So again, seeing a number of referral routes there, particularly self-referral routes, are strong as well. And obviously the numbers of people who are being referred via assertive outreaches have been increasing over the last year as well, which is obviously healthy for us in order to have that earlier intervention. So again, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Fraser. Any questions in the room? Anything people wants to add, Simon?
Just one point, just to set a little bit of context. So in terms of our drug services, we're redesigning that front door to a new target operating model, which will be a much more blended, multidisciplinary approach and much more embedded out into communities and localities. And working much more in partnership with community justice, social work, child and family social work, hopefully, or building up sort of shared care and different ways of working that don't just rely on specialist drug and alcohol services. But certainly the work that Fraser and co have done in sort of pathfinding and setting that up, that we're now sort of consolidating as a sort of business as usual within the whole service structure.
Okay, very good. And engagement, particularly with families, is something which is so close to my heart. It's something that needs to be done. Maybe was not done enough at the time.
So certainly from a wider ADP perspective, as part of the Lloyd refresh, we'll be looking to reset our whole framework that we're working to. Very keen and supportive of the work of the family support model, and we have funding again from Cora, which the ADP has matched to set up a whole family project. So traditionally our drug services have kind of worked with the individual who's presented rather than the whole family. So we're bringing in some extra capacity. So we're going to work with 10 priority families at a time in a holistic way, with the aim of reducing the harm and I guess reducing the need for child protection escalations, etc., within the sort of scope of the family model. So we're also bringing in some psychology support that will help build a more holistic way of working with families as well. So there are things in the pipeline. It's never fast enough or quick enough, but we are trying to do that.
Well, it's good to hear that you've got the financing that you need, the funding that you want for Cora and the Scottish Government. I wonder if that financing and that funding will be able to extend that to communities as well, going further again from the individual to families and families to communities.
So there's a couple of strands of work that are developing in relation to that. So coincidentally had a meeting with Michelle yesterday around in sort of setting targets within priority neighbourhood areas in terms of the distribution of naloxone, and I guess using naloxone as a proxy to engage with families and others around harm reduction and that emergency crisis response. We know that the vast majority of naloxone kits are going out to individuals at risk rather than families, so there's a room for improvement there. And I would see that then as being the start of trying to work in a more collegiate way within priority neighbourhoods and have service offerings there as well, so that their sort of community resilience builds up as well.
I don't know what your stock is of nasal spray of naloxone, but they are fantastic for engaging with families and with communities, a lot better than the previous thing, which was a bit more difficult for communities to get engaged, even families to get engaged with. But yeah, the nasal spray, it's a fantastic opportunity.
I think as well, Councillor, that one of the other things we need to look at is that longer term engagement for family members. I totally agree. I think that's a fantastic way to engage and to get access at a point of crisis, in particular for family members who have loved ones who may be at high risk. But we're obviously also looking at how we develop recovery type packages for family members themselves to look after their own recovery. And I think that longer term aspect needs to be acknowledged as well. And that's something that we're very keen to pursue further and to be able to offer that support going forward.
Any more question, any more comment in the room? No. So we can know the plan to scale up. That's absolutely bad. Really interesting about that, and really has concluded. So everybody agree? We'll go to the next one now. Is general business. You're pleased to hear. We'll go on the Child Poverty Plan 2022-2023 was presented already to the Anti-Poverty Committee, and I think it's going to go to the Education Committee as well. And on Shepherd and Paul Tytler, but I know Paul is in the room.
Thank you, Councillor Allard. Yeah, what you have before you is our statutory child poverty report. We have tried to, as a Children's Services Board, work really closely within the statutory guidance that exists to help shape the plan. We've tried to be really quite comprehensive in terms of looking at all of the activity, and it is significant that it's focused around child poverty, just to make sure that you've got a comprehensive report in terms of the work being undertaken. I think having gone through this process, there are implications, I think, in terms of some of the data that we collect, how we review our impact moving forward. But it's been actually really quite helpful to look at the totality of the work and in pulling this together to have a clear sense of how the board can take this forward, moving forward. So just, I guess, to reiterate, this is a statutory report that straddles the local authority and health board. So that's why it's come through Community Planning Aberdeen for sign off.
Thank you for that. It's a fantastic report. We debated it at length at the Anti-Poverty and Inequality Committee, and we very value NHS and our officers to doing a fantastic job on this, and very much appreciated. Any comment and question online or in the room? No, we are happy to approve the report. Okay, and we'll go on 4.2 community wealth building, and we've got Jim Johnson and Tanita Alario who is here to do presentation introduction. Thank you, Tanita and Jim.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to come and speak with you all today. So as said, my name is Tanita Dario, and I'm a project officer in the employability team in City Growth at Aberdeen City Council. And my role is to support contractors with the delivery of their community benefits. But more recently, I've been tasked with coordinating the development and integration of a community wealth building approach within Aberdeen City Council.
Good afternoon. Thanks for seeing us. My name's Jim Johnson. I'm the Service Manager for City Development, and the Community Wealth Building activity falls within my services remit. And I'm going to hand over to Tanita because she's doing all the work. I'll be honest.
Thank you, Jim. So in this presentation, which will take approximately 10 minutes, we'll summarise the content of the report circulated. I'll provide some background and set out what community wealth building is and our role as anchor institutions, and that includes us as Aberdeen City Council and community planning partners. I'll then summarise community wealth building activity in Scotland and closer to home in Aberdeen, and set out some of the opportunities and benefits of integrating community wealth building through the refresh of the local outcome improvement plan. And we'll finish with the recommendation as outlined in the report. And Jim and I welcome any of your questions at the end of this presentation. So community wealth building is an internationally recognised approach to local economic development. It considers the ways in which the public, private and third sector can ensure that more wealth is generated, circulated and retained in communities and localities. Aberdeen City Council and other community planning partners are what are known as anchor institutions. And this simply means that we are rooted to an area, tend to employ a lot of people and have considerable buying and spending power through procurement. And for example, anchor institutions can be local authorities, NHS, police, further and higher education institutions, and larger private sector organisations. And collaboration between anchors is necessary for embedding community wealth building and maximising the impact across the local area. While in some places the public sector may represent the catalyst for community wealth building, it is critical that business and third sector have collaborative roles in its development. Aberdeen City Council seeks to influence and encourage anchors to adopt a community wealth building approach. It may be the case that community planning partners round the table may have already incorporated community wealth building into their strategic plans and ongoing activities. If this has occurred, it would be advantageous to engage in discussions regarding the approaches adopted by anchors to foster mutual learning. So the community wealth building approach centres upon 5 pillars, and these are levers available to anchor organisations to enable local economies to grow and develop from within. So the 5 pillars are spending, and the spending pillar centred on procurement, maximising the social, economic and environmental benefits from public procurement. So that's through the delivery of community benefits, for example. And the workforce pillar seeks to ensure there are opportunities for all through seed funding, the real living wage, paid work experience, in-work progression and fair work principles. The inclusive ownership pillar involves enhancing the delivery of business startup and growth support, which Business Gateway are helping us with, which focuses on local independent small and medium enterprises, social enterprises, cooperatives and community businesses. The financial power pillar seeks to increase flows of investment within local economies. And the land and property pillar seeks to use our land and property to strengthen local economies. For example, through community asset transfer and addressing vacant units and properties. And although not a pillar, sustainability and the environment are embedded in community wealth building, for example, through local resource utilisation, supporting the circular economy, minimising transportation, and local production and consumption. But why am I here talking about community wealth building and what sets it apart from economic development approaches? So community wealth building as an economic development approach aligns with many policies aimed at creating a fairer and greener, more resilient local economy. Nevertheless, it does have distinct characteristics that differentiate it from other approaches. There's a clear emphasis on local individuals and groups owning assets and generating wealth. And this is promoting inclusive business models such as cooperatives and enterprises owned by employees. Secondly, all local anchor institutions are to collaborate on this. So it's not just for local authorities and economic development departments to work on this. So we really need a collaborative approach to attract local investment and retain wealth. And finally, various organisations' actions are coordinated through community wealth building action plans. And this includes actions across the pillars as discussed in the previous slide. So where are we at in Scotland? The Scottish Government has confirmed plans to introduce legislation on community wealth building just during this parliamentary session. So that's up until May 2026. The aim of the proposed bill is to extend and deepen the implementation of community wealth building across Scotland, ensuring universal coverage and shared principles whilst allowing for local, regional and organisational flexibility. A consultation on community wealth building opened at the start of the year, with responses sought to inform and shape the legislation, and Aberdeen City Council responded to this consultation. The Scottish Government has established a community wealth building bill steering group, and there's been feedback from the Scottish Local Authorities Economic Development Group, SLADE, and they provided discussion on the opportunities and barriers of a community wealth building approach from an economic development perspective. The Scottish Government has 5 pilot areas in Scotland for community wealth building: Clackmannanshire, Fife, Glasgow City region, south of Scotland and the Western Isles. And many local authorities are assembling action plans and accelerating their activities on community wealth building, assessing the potential for community wealth building to enable a transition to a well-being economy. And there's an aspiration for Scotland to be at the international forefront of community wealth building activity. So in Aberdeen, a community wealth building action plan was approved in December 2022 at the Finance and Resource Committee, and it set out short, medium and long-term actions for implementation to embed a community wealth building approach across Aberdeen City Council. And these actions support the wider priority outcomes within Aberdeen City Council's delivery plan and the local outcome improvement plan. And we're part of an internal cross-service working group of council officers, and that's with colleagues from procurement, corporate landlord, communities and city growth, and we meet every 2 weeks. And the purpose of the group is to try and ensure service-wide understanding of what community wealth building is and embed the pillars in the organisation. And our focus on the short term is on spending, workforce and land and property, although there are actions against finance and inclusive ownership in the action plan that we're keen to progress on too. So what activities have we been doing in community wealth building? So under the spending pillar, led by colleagues in procurement, we have recruited a procurement development officer, Nadine Jabali, and her role is to help businesses with tendering for work in public sector contracts, signpost to the supplier development programme. We seek to continue with the ongoing delivery of community benefits, maximising the value of public money spent. And we're working with several contractors, to name a few: Balfour Beatty, BP, Bancon and Skyfarm. We're also assisting with the continual growth and great work of the Aberdeen Responsible Business Network, and contributing to ideas for an event coming up in September. Procurement colleagues have sought to revise the business case template to include supplier and market engagement. Under the workforce, which is led by the employability team, we've had the development of paid work experience scheme, the development of employability pilot projects, and the provision of seed funding to employability programme participants. And under the land and property pillar, led by corporate landlord, we're in the process of improving the community asset transfer webpage through the inclusion of videos and case studies, and improving the promotion of properties from Aberdeen City Council which are available for community asset transfer. So all this considered, what are the opportunities and benefits of integrating community wealth building into the refresh of the local outcome improvement plan? The timing, as Michelle set out, with the being into April 2024, it seems a good time to look at the prosperous economy section, how we can integrate community wealth building in there. Also, we've got the upcoming legislation which will come in, which may impose a duty for public bodies to develop and report on community wealth building action plans. I think this is a crucial point, the last point around flexibility. So there's no one-size-fits-all approach to community wealth building. It's done differently in each area, and also for each community planning partner around the table, how it's implemented and integrated through existing plans, there's a flexibility in the approach. So for example, at Aberdeen City Council, we've looked at 3 of the pillars for the short term. So all anchors are invited to examine community wealth building and how activity aligns with existing work and how it may add some additional work too. So the recommendation in the report seeks for the board to note the approach and that community wealth building be considered as part of the development of the local outcome improvement plan and anchor strategic plans to ensure alignment and to avoid duplication. Thank you. So Jim and I invite any questions on anything that was said. Thank you.
Any question online in the room? I might have one that just to understand it a little bit better. Does that mean that as a board we will have to adapt if we agree that community wealth building action?
I think it was more for it to be considered as part of the refresh of the local outcome improvement plan, and to integrate that throughout. I think the language around anchor institutions is not necessarily used at the moment, but also some of the existing work we're doing at the moment is community wealth building activity. So I think the ask is to understand what community wealth building is and to bring that to the table, but also seek that anchor institutions engage in discussions about how we can work together on community wealth building as a city. So yes, it's part of the refresh of the light. This is what was in the report.
Yeah, I really support the proposal of getting anchor institutions together. Clearly, as the NHS, we are deemed an anchor organisation. We've got work going on around procurement, around property, around employability. And what we have tried to do is take the connects from the local outcome improvement plan. Some of the stretch outcomes we believe we can contribute to, but we need to encourage our wider system to sign up to make a bigger contribution, and they're really up for that now. So having a forum that brings us all together to achieve more than the sum of our parts, I think, is a really welcome development. I do think there's different language. We've just had some guidance about our anchor work, which is slightly different than community wealth building, but I don't think that's insurmountable. I think just having those conversations will help get us on the same page. So really welcome the proposal. Thank you.
Any other comment or question? Are we quite happy to progress? Yes, Jim.
And just building on that point there, what would be helpful, and what's you see examples in other parts of the country, particularly Ayrshire, where they began the community wealth building journey some time ago, is where you get the anchor institutions, and we must find a better word than anchor institutions. And you get the anchor institutions to work together, you can see some actual real benefits from that activity, which I've experienced personally in the past. So I think that one of the questions I have to the members of the board is, who would be the right person in your organisation for us to talk to about community wealth building? And I accept that some people will be further along that understanding and journey than other people and other organisations, but it would be kind of, let's reach out and kind of, who do I talk to, or who does I need to talk to really, because it won't be me. So how do we move that forward? And it's a really interesting way of working at a very local level and making that benefit at a local level. So and bringing that umbrella of approach to what we're doing.
Thank you. Before I take Councillor Jean Cook, I just want to remind every other organisation, institution who would like to respond to the call which had been made by Jim. Yes, Councillor.
Thanks, Camilla. Yeah, no, it's just a very brief comment regarding the NHS, for example. In that, when we were moving the vaccination centre out of John Lewis, there were a number of places that we could have gone. And the reason that we opted to go in the Bonaccord Centre was actually first and foremost that the city centre is a relatively convenient location for lots of people. So that was the prime driver, but we also had as a kind of bonus that the fact that it would get more footfall in the Bonaccord Centre, so actually help the local economy, even though that wasn't the prime driver, but it was certainly a factor that we took into account.
Thank you. Has any other comment or thing? So maybe an action for Jim to contact everybody and making sure that you get some kind of response. I think that would be important to make sure that we've got that engagement. Are we happy to agree with the recommendations? Yes, agree. So we'll go to the next item is 4.3, Aberdeen Health Determinants Research Collaborative Update from Martin Mappage. Thank you. Martin.
Thanks, Chair. For people that might not know me, I'm Martin Murchie. I'm Chief Officer for Data and Insights with the City Council and Director for the Aberdeen Health Determinants Research Collaborative. I've had a few mentions already today, as has the HDRC, which is all really good. There's maybe people in the room, particularly perhaps colleagues behind me, who might benefit from a little bit of an introduction to the HDRC. So I'll just very briefly say that we've been funded by the National Institute for Health and Care Research to establish a health determinants research collaborative in the city. It's a local authority that are primarily funded, but the collaboration is with NHS Grampian, and Director of Public Health Susan is a co-applicant in the funding, and Deputy Director of Public Health, Professor Parandrothy is my co-director in the HDRC. So with NHS, but also with the two universities in the city. So the funding's for 5 years. Perhaps counterintuitively, the funding is explicitly not to fund bits of research. It's around changing skills, it's about changing attitudes, behaviours, around creating connections between the people who deliver services, people who make decisions, and academics and partners across the different organisations. So, for example, as a local authority, we're become better at accessing, using and commissioning research. At the same time, the research that's actually done locally or nationally is relevant, is applied and impactful. So we're connecting those things together. We're also really keen to pursue funding for research. So we have some irons in the fire around that. There's a steady stream of funding calls and applications that we want to access. And another part of the bid is around creating an ecosystem around data research. It's a huge barrier, having staff accessing it, the approval processes and ethics and so on. So we're trying to work together as a partnership to put up an effective research data ecosystem in place. Notwithstanding what I just said about the funding not specifically being for research, we have put into the bid 3 posts of research fellows, which will be employed by the local authority. We've appointed to 2 of those. They haven't started yet. The third one on health economics, we've had to re-advertise, but we're hopeful we'll get that third one appointed quite soon. That will give us specialist resource to do some research, whether that's primary research or supportive research, and they will also bring the skills to be a catalyst for change across the local authority and its partner organisations. In the bid that we put, we identified some priorities that we would work as a collaborative and a partnership with on research around the determinants of health. So those included food insecurity, fuel poverty, social prescribing, drug-related deaths, and a few other things. So we're working through those as topics with all the collaborative through some of the outcome improvement groups that we've got in Community Planning Aberdeen and through a range of other engagement mechanisms. For example, the Children's Services Plan that was updated this year, we were around that working with Eleanor and her colleagues in shaping that and also trying to identify where research opportunities would come from through that Children's Services Plan so we can build those in future. We talked earlier in the meeting about the refresh of the LOIP and the population needs assessment. So that was one of the name checks we got. So we've been working with Michelle around the data that goes into that, the analysis around the population needs assessment, but what comes out the other end, hopefully will be a revised research priorities based on the refreshed LOIP so that we can tie those things together. Just a couple of other points. One of the things that, because I like saying these things, so you please forgive me. I'm not going to take the whole 20 minutes that are left. So the word research can be a little bit of a barrier. We had a public event where we, on the coattails of the community planning event at the art gallery, and just asking members of the public engaging around what they thought research was. So obviously we're a research collaborative, so we can't drop that. And this isn't the snappiest thing, but we've sort of understood research to be acquiring new knowledge to answer relevant questions using sound methods. Now what that means is it doesn't have to be people in white coats that are doing the research, nor does it have to take 4 years to do the research. So some of this is around democratizing research, whether that's local authority employees, partners, but also members of the community. So we're very keen to pursue community-led action research. I was talking to Mrs. Shepherd last week around some of that stuff potentially in the areas of the city and schools. So all that's pretty positive. One of the other couple of other words to say, one is evaluation. So I think this is really important. So in terms of research, thinking about that at potentially the end of, well, research could be potentially at the beginning and evaluation potentially at the end of a project or a service. Well, I think these things are tied together. So we really want to be active as a research collaborative in the design of services, the research that goes in the beginning, but also planning how we build evaluation in at the beginning with those services. So this is my second word, data. We've heard that a lot today. The troubles that we have around accessing data and collecting data, trying to build those questions and that thinking in at the beginning of those processes so we know which data we can collect and how we can use that and how that then informs the evaluation that we will undertake throughout the life of a project and the service. Almost finished. A couple of other things. We've got some resourcing and a commitment around how we build lived experience into the research that we need to do as a collaboration. So what we're aiming for at the end of the funding is a changed approach to understanding and doing lived experience as a matter of course in these things, rather than come out with 2 lived experience studies, for example, which are point in time things. So that's what we're aiming for. And last thing I'll mention is about community engagement and involvement. This afternoon we've had the core group of our public involvement engagement HDRC group. So they're having their meeting. We've recruited members of the community into that. They're our sounding board for what we're doing. They'll be our sounding board for research proposals that come forward. We'll be recruiting from there to other members of communities in terms of that role of potential community researchers and so on. So yeah, I think I'm done. Yeah, thanks, Chair.
No, thank you very much for the update. I hope we're going to have more update, because we are looking very much with a lot of interest, data, local data, and particularly a timeline of data. That's everything what we want. I think everybody across the room will agree on that. Is what we need to understand better how we can make a difference. So yes, will that come back at one point to the board?
My understanding, Chair, is this will be a standing item, and we'll come back. So when we put the bid forward, we were very clear. We placed the HDRC within Community Planning Aberdeen in terms of its governance and responsibilities. So yeah.
Any question, any comment? Are we happy to agree to note the update? Thank you very much for your time online and things. I just want to finish by giving a vote of thanks to Shay Ewing, because I believe it's your last meeting for the board before your retirement. So we just want to value your time and your work, and it's very much recognized across the board. And you maybe want to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I've obviously really enjoyed my time working within the community planning board. Obviously impressed by the commitment of everybody that's involved in it. I really enjoy the project end reports, because we get to see, the inputs, our outcomes, but essentially seeing pieces of work coming to an end, and it's really great to be part of the LIFE project. I feel like I looked over my shoulder and suddenly my career was catching me up, but I wish everybody involved in it every success, and I look forward to having a look at it from the outside in the next few weeks or so. So thank you very much.
That's it for today. Thank you very much, everyone. We all